All right. Well, then that means we're in it.
We're live. Let's go.
Oh, man, I'm getting kind of ticked at us missing episodes, but I'll tell you what, things have been nuts on my end here.
Yeah.
We'll get back into the groove. 2023, we're going to go so hard. It's going to be great.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Welcome once again, my friends, to another episode of Man vs. World, where we help the modern man face this insane, wild world that we live in today. I am your host, Mark Queppet. I am an anti-escapism coach extraordinaire, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend, Pete. Pete, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing pretty swell, mostly. Life's been a little crazy lately. It's tough. It's tough sometimes when, like, the kind of challenges that I'm fine with are challenges where it's like, it's me. You know, it's like I'm the issue, and like I can face that, and I can take it on, and I can, you know, handle the pain and the discomfort, and I can go after it. What I found though is that, like, what's actually kind of harder than that is when, like, your loved ones close to you are struggling. Because especially if, like, you can only help them so much, you know, it's like, it's almost like, especially if they're feeling like they can't help themselves kind of thing, it almost turns, it made me come up with the term of meta victim. It's like you are the victim of someone else's victimhood. And that is where I think the deepest kind of mindset work sort of takes place. Like, if I were just going to jump like down into the depths of it, all right? You think about, you know, from the Christian perspective, it's like, oh, God loves us, right? And I know we got a question in here coming up where someone's wondering whether, you know, God is good and stuff like that because of all the suffering that he allows. And let's say God does truly love all of us perfectly, infinitely, that sort of thing. Well, what must it be like for God when we are suffering because of our own shortcomings or whatever, and like he can't override our free will and just fix it, or he's you know, in his infinite wisdom chooses not to. We'll talk about that more in a second, I guess. And I feel like that is where things get hard in life. Like, you know, if you've got a loved one close to you and they're just sick and or they're struggling with something, you know, maybe it's mental health or, you know, some kind of disease or something like that, and all you can do is sit by and sort of try to support them through it. That is a unique kind of suffering, you know? And in that sort of scenario, all you can really do, I think, is bring like, you got to be playing like a different game. Like, it's hard to just like focus on like just pure results. It's like, well, you know, I'm no magician. I can't snap my fingers and make your problem disappear. But what I can do is I can offer you what I have, which is, you know, comfort, support, advice, maybe time, effort. Maybe I got to do stuff, like all that kind of thing. And that's probably one of the harder things to deal with, is when you feel like you are investing time and energy, but you're not really certain whether it's paying off or not, and you don't know how long things will last. And so that's where I've been, you know, and I'm not going to really get into too much detail about it because, you know, it's about loved ones in my family and that sort of thing where, you know, it's not really my information to share. But that's what I've been dealing with, and that's why we're kind of behind. That's why we're not doing it on Twitter right now. But I still want to make sure that we're showing up and we're doing, you know, the work that we can here, right? Like, because I see it as my mission, my vocation, to be here and helping guys like address the real shit that life will throw at you. And a lot of the stuff we talk about here is, you know, lighter, more superficial things. But when you get down to it, it's really about like the real challenges come when you're plugged into the bigger picture, right? You're really plugged into the human experience, you know, the suffering of the world, the suffering of other people, and making sure that you maintain fortitude and strength in that is that's where I think the big differences occur, because it's like when you can show up strongly in positions where you feel helpless, where you feel powerless, that's where I think the biggest ripple effect really comes from. And it's maybe that's you could argue that's wishful thinking, but I think that that's a deep philosophical stance that I'm not willing to back down from, because like I think about the people in my life that I've seen stand up to things much harder than what I'm facing, by the way. Like nothing that I'm facing is anything for me to, really bellyache too hard about. But when you see that people do that, like stand up to the darkness in the world and refuse to go dark themselves, that is inspiring. And I think we are all called to do that to some extent or another in our lives. I don't know, maybe you're not, I don't know. What do you think, Pete? Is that something you've experienced? I know you're still pretty young, and hopefully you've been spared these sorts of scenarios, but maybe you can relate on some level.
Yeah, it's not quite the same because I don't have any, thankfully I'm not dealing with that on too close of like, well, I'll give you an example. So, a buddy of mine right now, his mom's got, and he can, I feel comfortable sharing this because it's anonymous, but his mother has a cancerous sort of thing going on, and she didn't want to do chemo for it because, chemo can be pretty rough.
Brutal, yeah.
So she's in Tijuana right now doing some sort of alternative treatment. And apparently there's a lot of Amish people there hanging out with her because they don't do chemo, but they'll do this treatment in Tijuana. Huh. And so
is this like the whole like coffee enema thing?
I have no idea what it is.
I've heard about like this like famous like, treatment for cancer where it's like they got you like on these like juices and you're doing these coffee like enema things, and apparently like some people it works for, and it's just not like approved in the United States. I don't know. I've heard it like can work though. It's pretty wild. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, so there's people I know who are going through some serious stuff, and it's tough, but I feel like, that's a good place to jump right into this, because this guy on the Self Mastery Club has a question about this topic. So he says, so a major conflict I have in my mindset is that as a Christian, I feel that God doesn't love me. I know that Mark talks a lot about how we're always looking for perfect pleasure or a taste of heaven in order to escape our reality of suffering. Yet what does one do when the highest good in the universe, Almighty God, is believed to be the very cause of that suffering? What if you feel that God values you so little based on the external evils you've seen and endured that you become bitter and see him as the enabler of that evil? Mm-hmm. The magnitude of evil present today makes me feel so insignificant, so unworthy of my goals. My greatest fear is having my achievements and dreams snatched away from me by the very powers that God has let run amok on the earth.
Yeah, that's like probably like the big spiritual question, right? Like, can God be good if there is so much suffering and evil in the world? It's like, how could an all good and loving God allow for such things? And you got like kind of the standard answers of like, free will. It's like, well, he's got to allow us to have free will if there's going to be actual love, and people will choose to use their free will poorly. But that doesn't really explain away things like caused by just natural causes, right? Like a natural disaster or a sickness or an illness or something like that. It's like, well, it's not like they used their free will poorly, that they got hit by a hurricane or got struck with some kind of disease or, suffered some sort of, unforeseeable misfortune, right? And so this is why I think that there's such a necessity for a spiritual mindset. And in particular, like I think it has to be a more traditional spiritual mindset where there is good and evil, because without that, okay, like they won't, like there's this idea that there is no, like, let's look at the two extremes, okay? On one extreme, you've got the atheistic mindset where it's like nothing is inherently good or bad, it just is, and it's our perceptions, the stories that we tell that make things good or bad, all right? And you can walk that route. The problem is you will live in a world where everything has only arbitrary value, only relative value. And in terms of a moral system, I would argue that that almost always ends up breaking down. It also doesn't give you much orientation in life. I think, you end up in a lot of cases defaulting to the pursuit of immediate gratification. And not always. I know there's atheistic people who live very virtuous and good lives. But I would argue even in a lot of cases, the people who are doing that are unknowingly appealing to some transcendent value. And you can look up, famous debates between people like that. I know Jordan Peterson's probably the most recent theist who makes good arguments, like his debates with Sam Harris and stuff. If you can sit through them, because they're kind of tedious, but a lot of what Jordan Peterson does is point out that Sam Harris is essentially appealing to some transcendent ethic, which he argues is a spiritual morality, a spiritual philosophy. So that's one extreme, which doesn't really vibe with me, and that doesn't really seem to be what this guy's dealing with. Then you got another extreme where it's kind of like the new age sort of woo-woo idea, where it's it's all energy, it's all love, it's all goodness. And the problem with that is, again, it doesn't offer you any sort of orientation. It doesn't give you any sort of way to, I would say, tackle the experience of what I would describe as evil, right? It doesn't give you a way to orient yourself. It just makes you think, oh, well, I'm seeing this wrong. Clearly, this must be a good thing. I must figure out how to embrace this as the cosmic will or something like that. And on one level, if you want to embrace a Christian mentality, you got to kind of believe that. You got to believe that in some greater scheme, the evil allowed in the world is serving a greater good. But I think you still need to be able to acknowledge evil in general. And so if you can do that, then here's the way that I have best come to terms with playing this game, which is it's not so much about, are you getting the status that you want in life? Are you getting the things that you want? Are you getting the money? Are you getting the success? Are you getting the relationships? Are you getting the acknowledgement? And our friend here, what he said was, magnitude of evil present today makes me feel so insignificant and so unworthy of my goals. My greatest fear is having my achievements and dreams snatched away from me. So they're concerned about their worldly status. And yeah, that's not safe in this world. It never will be. And that's not something you can fully control, is what I was saying earlier too. It's you can't control it. Even if you can't control if there's a economic collapse and all your money in your bank account disappears, or, if some crazy crypto guy steals billions of dollars and you're the one who gets snookered. Looking at you, Sam Bankman-Fried. So you can't control that kind of stuff. And you also can't control if someone you love, really starts to suffer and struggle and that sort of thing. But what you can control is your spiritual response, right? You can control how you view what's going on. And the way that I look at it is through that standpoint of spiritual warfare, where it's all right, there are options presented to me. I can embrace a mentality that gets bitter, that gets resentful, that gets despairing, okay, that falls into hopelessness. And I like to look at that stuff as demonic attack, all right? And you can think of these as demons of fear, of spite, of resentment, of whatever. And this is the traditional way to look at it. And this has been, in a lot of ways, passed up. This mindset has been abandoned in pursuit of something more sophisticated. But in terms of a practical model, I think that this is the most useful thing. Now, I can't obviously speak to the metaphysical reality of what's actually true, but I can speak to the practical reality of it, where it's if you're confronted with some sort of tragedy and you allow yourself to get turned toward darkness in some form or another, then it's that evil spirit is winning. It's expanding its domain. So say it, that evil spirit, it attacks something in the world and that metastasizes into some sort of economic collapse, or even just maybe it's just something that happens in your workplace. All right. There's the CEOs did some shady business dealings, and because of that, they eventually got caught and collapsed, and then you get fired. All right. The way in which that spirit really wins, that evil spirit that was at the root of that downfall, and we call that evil spirit a bad thought pattern, a bad way of operating, serving the wrong moral ethic, whatever. If you let that then turn you south, right? It's like that demon's, it's now infected you, okay? And if you let that infection fester inside of you, well, then you will then start allowing for more decay, more decline. Maybe you start drinking. Maybe you start, leaning heavier on the porn. Maybe you start treating other people more poorly. Maybe you become more cutthroat, cold, and bitter. And this is a shitty place to be. And we're all constantly confronted with scenarios like this. And this is why I love the story of Job. Did we talk recently about Job on the podcast? I don't think we did.
I don't think so, but
okay.
I did see your tweet about that. That was interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my head's at about. So if you're not familiar with the story of Job, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete. It's been a little while since I actually read the full text, and you're probably a little more versed in it. You're familiar with the story of Job, right?
A little bit, but not terribly.
So come on, man. You're supposed to be like my biblical scholar here.
I know. I'm sorry.
Basically, if I'm remembering the story correctly, like what ends up happening is that Job's like this really good, faithful man, and this is like Old Testament. So he's like, this Jew who's like really faithful, loves God, that sort of thing. And Satan approaches God and essentially like offers him a wager, and it's like, hey, give me control over Job's life, and I bet he will denounce you. He will reject you. He will curse you. And God's like, okay, bring it on. And so God gives Satan the ability to just start screwing with Job, or maybe even God actively does it himself. I'm not sure. I think it's either way. It's kind of the same idea, but then Job starts getting just wrecked from all sides. Like, his family, I think his wives get killed. He loses all of his fortune. Like, he just undergoes like a pretty hellish period in his life. And even after everything's taken away from him, Job doesn't curse God. He asks, he turns to him, he's like, yo, what the heck, bro? Like, he gets upset. He's like, what's going on? But he doesn't denounce God. And basically then God's like, see, told you, Satan, get owned. And then he gives Job everything back, like, tenfold or something like that. And what I took away from that is like, when you're suffering in life, and you're given some sort of tragedy or hardship, the way I like to think about it is that God has essentially bet on you. He has bet on you to be able to face this darkness and not succumb to it. And when you start looking at life on this level, then everything becomes this spiritual battle. It's like, are you moving to become a more steadfast, shining light of goodness in the world, or are you becoming slowly corrupted, or even rapidly corrupted? Are you letting the prince of this world, aka Satan, aka the psychological principle of selfishness, spite, resentment, hatred, this sort of thing, are you letting that infect you and turn you into something less good, less bright, less pure, into something that instead becomes an agent of darkness that just perpetuates more and more of the evil that you are hurt by? And so I think, particularly as men, this mentality is powerful because it gives us a battle to fight. Like, we have this idea, and I know we'll be getting to this more a little bit later, that being a warrior today means like you got to go and you got to learn how to use guns and you got to be tough and you got to know how to choke a dude out with your jujitsu and all that kind of shit. But that to me, that's just another kind of work. All right. If you're an actual professional soldier, I mean, like, your job is to go, carry out your missions and, kill people, and hopefully they're people that should be being attacked and everything like that. But, that's just a job, in the same way that, like, it's the job of a butcher to go and, chop up a cow and things like that. But, like, the real war is the war of the spirit, the war of the spiritual plane, where it's like, what spirit, what narrative, what character are you fighting for? And what spirit, character, etc., are you fighting against? And when you learn how to look at your life in this way, then, like, your life does become this epic battlefield. It becomes this place where it's like, are you one of the good guys or one of the bad guys? And almost every single moment of your life contains this battle. And it's a simple one. It's like, are you pursuing your highest conception of goodness with all of your being, or are you not? Because anything other than a total commitment to your highest conception of being, i.e., serving commandment number 1, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul. If you're not doing that, then on some level you are, quote unquote, sinning. And sinning is an archery term. It means to miss the mark. All right. It means that you are not engaging in battle correctly. You are setting yourself up to lose. You are weakening yourself. You are weakening your standing in the spiritual hierarchy of competence. And as men, we want to be competent. We want to be heroes. We want to be the man who can rise to the top. But there are some games that are far more important than other ones, right? Like, we understand what a low level game is. Like, who gives a shit if you're, like, really good at some video game online? We care more. It's like, oh, are you really good at making money? Or are you really good at making friends? Are you really good at getting sex? Okay, we start to value them a little bit more, but still, those are sub games as far as I'm concerned in the game of life. And they're ones that can be completely upended and completely removed from you, depending upon what kinds of circumstances are thrust upon you. The one game that will never disappear is this game of the spirit. It's like, are you going to stand up to darkness, to fear, to all these things, and choose love? A righteous kind of love, not a soft kind of love, but the kind of love that is completely and totally committed to the highest conception of goodness, and realizing that in your life. And you can feel it. You can feel it physically inside of you when you are aligned with that. You can feel it physically inside of you when you're even just contemplating it, okay? Because contemplating it can feel heavy. It can feel hard because there's sacrifice that must be made. Like all war, there's always going to be sacrifice required. But when you're making those sacrifices, when you commit to it, there will feel like a loss at first, but then there is this freeing, this freedom that comes from it when you completely submit to it. And it's like this polarity principle where it's like the more submitted, the more submissive you are to your highest conception of goodness, the more dominant you become in your day-to-day activities. And you gain a level of confidence, a level of drive, a level of follow-through that is otherwise unmatched, because you are on that path of the straight and narrow. And that's like the what do you want to call it? It's like the fiber connection to the spiritual plane. That's like the neurochemical superhighway that will allow you, when you're completely lined up with it, that's what's going to allow you to truly live on fire as a man that is truly formidable. And it's just that the world doesn't really recognize it like this. They want to see the guy who's winning in all these worldly games. And sure, you can still do that, and sometimes you might still be called to do that. But really, the game that matters is the one of the spirit here. And so it's more to me like this, like what he's talking about here, our friend, and this like anger and like toward God, this feeling that, maybe God's bad. Like, I just see that as a spiritual battle. You're in a battle right now where there's a spirit that would want to tell you that life is actually not good. Because if God's not good, then life certainly isn't good, right? Like, it's not. It's actually, life is just a cruel, disgusting, sadistic joke. And if you step into that mentality, what do you think is going to happen then? How do you think you're going to live, right? At that point, then it's like, why not? Why don't I just pursue immediate pleasure? Why don't I just, drown myself in whatever sort of escapist vices I can gain access to? There's no reason to not do that, right? And so what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to create more suffering in the world or less? I think the answer is obvious, but the goal here, man, is to embrace that bravery, to have that faith, the faith that goodness does exist, that it is a transcendent thing, even in the face of suffering. And that's what faith is. I think it's the willingness to believe in goodness, even when the whole world is telling you that goodness doesn't exist. And you could argue that that's irrational, that that's crazy. But that's what faith is. It can't be rational. It can't be a purely rational thing. It's more about like identity. It's like, what kind of person are you? And that, I think, is what we all need to think about very, very deeply.
Wow, that's really true, because if you can see what you're hoping for, it doesn't really take any hope in the first place.
Right. Then it's just logic then. Then it's just like, oh, I can just anticipate this. I can see how this works, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I believe it's when you have no logical reason to believe in goodness, that's when you really find it, because that's when you can encounter it as a transcendent ideal, something that goes beyond simple cause and effect and circumstance. And the more and more you connect with that in that state, the more you connect with the truth of who you are. Because if you can find that inside of yourself, well, you got to ask yourself, where the hell does that come from? Where does that ability to align myself with the transcendent come from? Well, clearly it came from somewhere inside of me. And so what does that say about me? It says that, oh, actually, if I so choose it, and the only way you can really choose it, like I was saying, is in the face of suffering, where you don't have anything to really gain, and you choose that, then you get to then see that, oh, maybe that is who I am. Maybe I am actually a channel of transcendent love, or a seed of transcendent love, or in some ways the source of it in this world. And that's what I believe. I mean, like, barring miraculous intervention, okay, where else does this show up in the world? Nowhere, except for through humans. And so it's like we are called to be that. We are called to be that, divine source of love that is freely chosen, right? Like, we have to embrace our true nature in order to even find it. And obviously this is a metaphysical argument and whatnot, and I'm sure it could go back and forth, and maybe we could do that with someone at some point. But that's the only way that I've come to find peace with these sorts of circumstances.
I really wish that more people held your outlook that it's a spiritual war, because it is. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, and there's so many people who claim to believe in God and they don't believe in anything else. It's like, how could you, man, that's a cruel existence. I would not want to be one of those people.
What do you mean don't believe in anything else?
They don't believe in any evil, any evil. It's all God. God's responsible for cancer. He's responsible for this. He's responsible, And, it seems like this guy might not believe that too much. He's more talking about, well, he enabled it to happen through, let's call him Satan, right? Uh-huh. He enabled it to happen. And that's a good question. I'm not God. So would I do things differently? Maybe, but I'm not God. So I don't really get a vote, But one thing that I find interesting is a lot of people will stop there, and they never ask, well, what does God will? There's this free will thing that he created. So we know that he wants there to be a choice. It says in Deuteronomy that I've given you the choice to choose between life and death. And then he says, choose life, Right. So he gives us the answer, but there's still the choice there. But it's pretty clear, it says in 2 Peter 3:9 that he doesn't want anyone to perish, but for all to come to repentance. And then it says, later on in Matthew, it says, well, many go through the wide gate that leads to destruction. So clearly God's will does not automatically come to pass, but I think a lot of people have it in their head that God's will just magically happens in your life, and everything that happens happened for a reason. But the reality is that God said, I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. Says the NIV.
Right. And it's that's why I always come back to like my little book I wrote, the anabolic optimism. And that idea of pain is always power wrapped in a puzzle. And I think that these bigger existential pains that you maybe can't directly affect and just shift through good action and intention, what these are, the power that these are giving you access to is this deeper connection to goodness, this transcendent connection to goodness. Because when you can find this, you can find, call it the love of God, call it access to, transcendent good, like whatever you want to, whatever sort of language you can couch it in to make it comfortable to your worldview. The end result, though, is that when you find this connection, it's something that stays with you. It's something that you have with you then, and it increases the unconditional access you have to joy. And joy is like a state of peace, also mixed with I would say it's more than peace, because there's peace as a part of it, but there's also a delight in the understanding that this is good, even in the face of suffering. Like you read about, the lives of saints or deeply spiritual people, saints across like all religions, and these are people who can maintain not just their composure, but maintain their levity, maintain the brightness of spirit, regardless of how ugly and dark the world around them becomes. And you hear these incredible stories of these people, like, how they're, singing church hymns while they are being walked into the gas chambers at Auschwitz and shit like that. And it's like, okay, objectively, one of the worst scenarios you could find yourself in. And these people still have a joy. They still have a lightness. They have not abandoned the value of their own lives. And imagine if you had that. Imagine how that would transform your life, where the little sufferings and stuff that come across your path don't knock you down flat, and instead they just kind of roll off you, and you just keep moving forward, taking the next right step, even if that next right step is into greater suffering and darkness, because that's simply the thing in front of you. And I guess like what we're looking to unlock here is heaven on earth, right? We're all aiming for heaven. We're all aiming for perfect infinite bliss, and chances of us getting that in this life based upon some kind of conditional materialistic circumstance, I think it's not going to happen. We might have tastes of it. We might, if we're very blessed, have extended tastes of it, but it's never going to be permanent. It's never going to be perfect. But when we start stepping into this transcendent mindset, this one that goes beyond conditionality, that's the real heaven. And that's what we seek to increase, and if you're going to put it back in the spiritual warfare mentality, it's like the extent to which we embrace that is the extent to which we are bringing about the kingdom of God on earth. Like that's what spiritual warfare is about. It's like, are you advancing this kingdom of unconditional love, or are you losing it? Are you letting it be taken over by succumbing to the powers of darkness?
Yeah. Well, we could probably talk about this for a full podcast, because I love talking about this stuff, but we got other stuff to hit on. So let's go ahead and talk about these $10,000 boot camps that guys are paying for to become real men. So I don't know if you've seen these around, but basically these guys will put together, a week-long camp, however long it is, they all depend, and they'll put these guys through a strenuous kind of boot camp-esque sort of experience to toughen them up.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know, when are we going to start one of these?
Well, we got one. It's called quitting porn.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. No, so these things, I get what they're trying to do, and I don't even think it's a bad thing. I think they can probably be good things. Guys, they feel like they are being like stunted by the modern world, and they feel like they need some hardship, they need some brotherhood, they need some camaraderie in order to find the strength inside of them. It's like, the modern world is so easy in some ways that they want to have a direct challenge that they can wrap their hands around and say they conquered it, right? They can get through this boot camp. But at the end of the day, it's like that boot camp, it's over. It's over at the end of the weekend, right? It's no longer there. And sure, you can, keep up with your club and things like that and stay in contact with it. But at the end of the day, it's that real spiritual war. That's the one that's going to follow you around. And I don't know, like I'm kind of mixed on these because I think a lot of guys who are lost and they do these things, they get a lot out of it. They definitely feel like they make progress, and they definitely might even unlock some permanent progress. It could even be a turning point in their life. And I think, I don't want to denigrate that at all. It can be a big launching point for a lot of guys. I do think that in some cases they are the victim of some savvy marketing that maybe gets them to shell over maybe more money than they need to spend in order to have a meaningful experience like that. And I also maybe doubt a little bit how much of the carryover effect they're going to experience from this kind of stuff is. But I don't know enough about them to really say. But you don't need to spend 10 grand to have a rite of like initiation into your masculinity. I think for most guys, it's sitting right there in front of them, and it's like, start with quitting porn, like dead serious. Like, do that. You're going to find out, I would argue, probably more about yourself than you will at one of these $10,000 boot camps. Seriously.
Yeah.
Because you're going to actually have to understand, here's how my life is working right now. And the way it works is that it relies upon this fundamental escape pattern in order to even cope with it. All right. And so you take that coping mechanism of pornography out, and now you're confronted with your life, how it actually is. And you realize, oh man, I don't know how to do life without this sort of artificial escape, without this drug. And you can do this with any drug. You can talk about alcohol, you can say video games, you could say, marijuana, whatever the heck your thing is, could be a harder drug. But like, the reason why people get hooked on these things is because without them, their current life seems unbearable. And almost always, that is some combination of practical issues and internal issues, right? Like part of it's their mindset that makes their current life shitty and unappealing because they're looking at it in a shitty and unappealing way. But then part of it's also because there are real legitimate problems. Maybe they don't have friends. Maybe they don't have a satisfying career. Maybe they're out of shape and unhealthy. And these are all things that you can then turn into your own personal journey, your own personal adventure, your literal like video game like quest log. It's like, okay, quest number 1, quit porn. Quest number 2, get in shape. Quest number 3, like get productive and gainfully employed doing something that I don't hate, right? Like you can, like, to me, I would much rather have guys doing that kind of work than going and doing like a special forces LARP, which, I'm not going to downplay the power of spending time with bros doing hard things. You can definitely get something cool and awesome out of that. I just don't think that's the thing that's going to really move the needle in the lives of the majority of guys out there. I don't know. What do you think?
You're right. I mean, I like your idea better. I think you should quit porn because that's going to actually teach you how to think, and to control your thoughts. And controlling your thoughts is the easiest way to control your emotions, and controlling your emotions is the easiest way to control your actions. So if you want to see results in your life, starting with the mind is a good place to start. $10,000 on pretend boot camp. I think the real value that people see in that is it's a confidence booster.
Yeah.
But you can do it for a lot cheaper. I mean, you can have somebody drop you off on the other side of the country and then walk home. I mean, that would give you some confidence because you're going to have to learn how to survive real quick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not that expensive.
And the thing that, like, people aren't realizing with this kind of experience is that it's all curated. Yes, you are going to have to face significant physical and mental push back and challenge, right? But you're doing it in the context of this expectation. You're doing it in the context of this put together machine that is designed to move you from point A to point B. And this makes a lot of sense for people who are actually in the military, because they're that's what they need. They need to have extreme physical pain tolerance. They need to have a certain level of fitness. They need to have trust in their brothers to help them accomplish the mission. But that's not the exact same skill set that you need in order to thrive in real life. Okay? In real life, especially in the modern world, it's like you need to have the ability to make the right choices day in and day out when your brothers aren't around you. When there isn't someone who's saying, hey, you got to get up at this time, and then you got to carry a log here, and then you got to go spend time underwater and, get screamed at. It's like, no, like what can you do when there isn't someone around you yelling at you to go through this process, right? Like that's the real modern superpower, because if you have that, well, then you can construct whatever kind of life you want. The modern world allows for that, especially if you got $10,000 in your pocket. If you're at that point already where you have $10,000 to burn on something like this, you need an internal boot camp. You need one where you find your sense of self. You need one where you find who you really are, learn how to interact with yourself. That's my take. It's like, I think this is kind of more like a Spartan race. Like it's more like a fun thing. And yes, it 100% can build up your confidence. It can 100% help you, connect with the friend group. And if they've got some kind of maintenance thing afterward where you reconnect with these guys and that sort of stuff, certainly value in that. Definitely not trying to shit on that. I just think that that's only a partial measure that is more, fun. It's like the second kind of fun. Like I forget who the heck I was hearing talk about that. I think it was actually Joe Rogan. He was talking about how he had a conversation with a previous, I think, comedian or something, where he's like, there's different kinds of fun. There's like the fun that you have while you're doing it, which would be the things like, like going to an amusement park, right? Really fun, riding a roller coaster. Woo! But then you have the kind of things that are fun only after the fact, when it's fun to look back and reminisce, right? It's like, back when we were these aspiring comics and we're doing these shitty gigs and we were, totally dying on stage or whatever. It's funny now. And that's what I see like this is. It's like, this is just that second kind of fun. The level of strength and power you gain from it, depends on what else you do with it, because by itself I don't think it's really going to necessarily make for a permanent change.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, next up, Bruce from the SMC sent me an interesting video that argues for why Aragorn from Lord of the Rings is the epitome of masculinity. Let's check it out.
Aragorn.
Is it just me, or can we be a little misguided when it comes to the heroes we cultivate in our culture these days? I mean, our popular culture really only seems to be able to produce two extremes when it comes to the, male hero. It's either the annoying beta male type, or the so-called alpha male, the badass type that really seems to be overdone these days. The latter being the modern concept of the dominating man who thrives in violence for its own sake and is defined by doing and taking what he wants. In my opinion, it's probably derived from the philosophical notion of the Übermensch in Nietzsche and other philosophers that were appropriating pagan tropes from Norse, Germanic, and classical Greek myths, while the weakling beta male is a more postmodern concept meant to counteract the modern alpha male type, by being more gentle and less dominant and often passive. But guys, calm down. You're both toxic. The true virtue of true masculinity in Western civilization was discovered long ago, and it's neither modern or postmodern. It's not about choosing between a tough man archetype or a gentle boy archetype. The key is to find the universally affected male archetype in the gentle man warrior, or in more ancient terms, the knight. The word gentleman emphasizes these two concepts, because the best man, capable of being the most productive and helpful to his society, is one who is gentle to those who need the gentle touch, namely women and children, under his protection, and yet is simultaneously capable of spilling the blood of the monsters and criminals who threaten those that cannot protect themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think Aragorn, I like Aragorn as a character because he... in a lot of ways, like I'm no Tolkien like lore master, but from what I understand is that like he had been like kind of running away from his mission. He was like technically like the king of this, Minas Tirith or Gondor, I guess. He was the rightful heir, but he wasn't there. He was like off, like, wandering around, being like the head of the, what were they called? I don't know, the Wanderers or something like that. I forget what they're called. The Dunedain or something. Like he was just like not embracing his responsibility. And then through the events of Lord of the Rings, he eventually comes to terms with shit. I gotta like step up and become the bigger, better man. I gotta like take that full responsibility on. And that responsibility, it's not about me. It's about everyone else, right? It's about figuring out what is the ultimately effective mode of being. And that's what he was talking about here. It's like, it's not just one or the other. You can't just be soft and gentle. You also can't just be, a hard, tough guy. You are called to both in some form or another. And if you cannot do both, then you are a only semi-functional tool in the body of humanity, right? Like if you want to maximize your utility and goodness that you're able to bring to the world, and hopefully therefore unlock your highest sense of fulfillment, because I believe that that's where fulfillment really comes from. It comes from embracing the fullness of, and tapping into the highest level of meaning possible. Then it's got to be both. It's got to be more about, can you display all of the qualities necessary, and can you switch between them as needed, right? And it's interesting, it brings up the knight. The knights, they had their code of chivalry. They're called to be, these upstanding protectors of people, and who knows how real some of that was. I'm sure there were plenty of dudes who were just, knights in name only. They like to fight and rape and pillage and do all that kind of shit. But I'm sure there were at least some legitimate ones. I mean, like, the spiritual world was omnipresent in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and shit like that. So there had to have been some who really took this seriously, and they were able to do both. And it's, that's the guy that I want to be my friend, right? Like that's the guy who I want to be on my team. That's the guy who I want to be my leader. I want him to be able to be a monster to enemies and be able to attack the things that need to be killed. But I also want him to be able to love and care for the things that need that. Right. So I agree with that. I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And, Aragorn has, he's definitely not, I wouldn't say he's presented often as that kind of like top masculine role model hero, particularly today, because we've instead wanted to market so much more those two extremes, which I think are easier myths to roll into a compelling Hollywood approved package. But you think about it, like there's like almost no other franchise in the fantasy world, or at least really many other franchise period, that are as big and enduring as Lord of the Rings, right? So it's like Tolkien was onto something with the way that he constructed his heroes, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because it speaks to this deeper truth. We all know this, but we try to simplify things. We try to oversimplify them. We want them to just be one thing or the other, so that we can just make it so easy for ourselves to follow. But I think we're limiting ourselves by doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting that Hollywood doesn't go for stuff like this, because going through the comments of that video, a lot of people really resonated with the whole idea of, we need more things like this. Because when I look, top comment was saying how when I look at, these super alpha male, it just seems unrealistic. Both ends of this spectrum, they're not real people. You know what I mean? I guess you can meet some people like this, but when you meet that guy who's, indestructible, it seems like he's just kind of covering for something. There's some sort of hidden insecurity there, and then vice versa. Or on the other side, you have the beta boys who, I like how Jordan Peterson says it, where there's nothing particularly, noble about being harmless.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also it's like the realistic thing is like, all right, if this guy like truly is a beta boy, is he really saving the day at the end of the day and getting the girl? No, he's not actually going to be saving the day because he's, breeding weakness in pretty much everything that he does. And then also you got that super extreme alpha guy, filled with the intense rage and coolness and that sort of shit. You think that guy's happy? No. That's why the most compelling versions of the bad boy or whatever, he's always some kind of tortured soul who's definitely not happy. He definitely doesn't have a sense of inner peace, right? Like, he showed Wolverine, for example, like in this. It's like, yeah, Wolverine's a tortured soul. And the only time that he had known like any peace was when he was also like, embedded into the academy, helping students and shit like that. And so, we just have to watch out for this, like, because we live in a world where we want to, everyone's chasing the juice. Everyone's chasing that dopamine. And you can create a lot of attention for yourself by like really digging into one side or the other. And what you're really looking for, I think, is you want to find someone with the true levels of depth and complexity that can account for the depth and complexity of life. If you're just going after this one-dimensional image and you're trying to embody yourself by chasing it, well, I mean, you're going to find some places where that one dimension does not work. And if you just keep doubling down on it, you're just going to be digging yourself a pit that you're not going to be able to get out of.
Alrighty, guys. Next up, here's why this TikToker says, if you're not making $25 an hour, you should be terrified.
If you're making less than $25 an hour right now, you should be terrified. If you are making less than 25, you're going to be very pissed off by the time we get to the end of this video. So this information here is going to scare the shit out of you. I just spent some time looking at some monthly averages of regular costs of living all across the U.S., average costs. And I put them all in a spreadsheet and did all the math for you so you can see exactly what this big picture is here. So these are just normal expenses that most single consumers have, and this is all of them laid out national average right here. The average cost of an apartment is $16.59 a month. With groceries, you're going to spend $500 on that, and go down a list here. But add all...
Well, he's already like, depending on how he got these numbers, he's already messing things up because the high end of like consumerism is going to really throw off the averages. So I don't know.
All that up, you're looking at $32.85 a month just in your cost of living expenses. Which means to break even and just squeeze by paycheck to paycheck, you have to be making $32.85 every 4 weeks. So
all right, this guy is his numbers are already
making 30 to break even. And
does anyone say that?
When I was looking in the comments, people were saying like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do?"
TikTok's dumb. TikTok actually has the dumbest people in the entire planet on it, which is why I think it's the most popular platform.
Probably.
And so like, let's just look at it.
Just in your cost of
rent. If you're making $25 an hour, yeah, you shouldn't be paying $1,659 per rent. Okay.
Yes.
You also should absolutely not be paying $400 in vehicle payments. You absolutely do not need to be spending $500 per month on groceries. Like, you could literally eat like all meat and not like solid quality meat and not be spending $500 on that. So like he's just inflating. All right, what this is, my friends, is someone who is, oh sorry, I don't even have these pictures up, so you can see the numbers here. But what this guy's doing is he's just making a TikTok video, guys. This is what you run into, is that people like this guy's spreading a fear message that is, either he's dumb and he doesn't, he's not good with numbers, or he's doing this intentionally so that he can create a strongly emotional message. Like, if you get into the art of how to create viral content, one of the most important things you need to do is you need to pick the feeling, the emotion that you want someone to feel when they're listening to it. And this guy's like, he woke up and he said, I'm going to make people feel fear today. And so that's what he set out to do. And guess what? He got a shit ton of views from it. Okay. And it's something like, 7,000 comments. Is there a way to see the number of views on it? I don't think there is.
If you go to the profile, but it's kind of hard to tell. I just look at you can look at the number of likes. That should give you an idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's 222,000 likes on this video.
Yeah.
And like stuff like this, like I hate this kind of content because what it is this person, he's spreading negativity. And I'm not saying there's no reason to be negative. Okay. Like inflation's bullshit. A lot of prices are fucked up. You do want to try and increase your income. If you're making $25 an hour, what is that about? That's like what, almost like, is that 50 something thousand a year, 60,000 a year, something like that?
Something like that.
Like you can for sure still live like that. Maybe not abundantly and that sort of thing, but you can still do that. Not saying it's not hard. And where you live while you do that kind of work also obviously impacts things. If you like live in the Bay Area of San Francisco, yeah, that's probably not going to be enough. But the thing is like you have to actively create a barrier for yourself against this kind of stuff. Cause like there's gonna be a bunch of people, there's plenty of people in the comments who are just taking this as like, oh yeah, I'm fucked. Oh, this is so bullshit. Oh, I don't have a chance. Oh, now I need to be living in, fear and, scarcity and need to, if I don't make more money now, and it's just like, come on, like there's better ways to live. And if you don't watch out for this kind of thing, you will get hijacked. And this is literally a template that all of media is using. All of the news media, like so much of the news is literally based upon generating fear. If it's not built upon generating fear, it's built upon generating anger. Because fear and anger are the easiest things to make stupid people feel. Bottom line. It's like, I can bring up here, look at what the libs just did. Or, look at what these evil conservatives just did. Oh, these MAGA Republicans, they're going to come. And it's just like, you do this kind of shit and everyone's just like spun into this like frothing frenzy of negative emotion. And they don't realize that a lot of it's just the result of greedy people trying to press your buttons. So you keep pressing their buttons, clicking their links, giving them attention, getting money for their advertisers and that's kind of shit. And it's like, we got to become smarter as information consumers to stay away from this kind of stuff.
Yep. That's excellent. And also, these numbers that he's pulled up, like rent, for example, a lot of people would say, oh, well, it's expensive in my area, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, what 18-year-old young guy do you know is living in a house by himself?
Yeah.
It's just like, my goodness.
I'm not
it's ridiculous.
If you're trying to do 25 an hour and you're trying to be the sole provider for a family, a wife and potentially, a kid or more, yeah, that's going to be tough, guaranteed. But like, if you're just a single person, that doesn't need to be game over for you. It's just, this stuff is, I don't know. I'm not saying things aren't hard and I'm not saying that there's no reason to try and increase your income. I just have an issue with the way this guy went about it.
Yeah. All right. Last but not least, Captain Sinbad on YouTube brought this idea to my attention called the highlight of the day, and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I wanted to get your take on it.
The highlight of the day is a concept from the book Make Time, and it's all about getting one thing done every single day. For me, this has been a game-changing time management principle. Just pick one thing, like one thing that you can do in like a reasonable amount of time. So if you have a really, really big task, break it down so it's a mini task that you can complete in 3 or 4 hours at most. I will say though, in the 100 days of momentum that I've started and like trying to make 100 days, the 100 best days of my life, I've found that as soon as I establish what the highlight of the day is and I start to work towards it, it's almost as if the universe starts putting obstacles in my way to stop me from doing it. Like the universe is like, hey, why do the highlight of the day when you can do this other also useful, like pretty good task? It's like not the most important task, but it's a pretty good one. Why don't you do that one instead? Like invariably, like without a doubt, I get like tens of obstacles. Maybe I made plans to like meet a friend for dinner and I haven't seen this friend in like 3 months, right? The thing didn't get done. Honestly, what I've come to realize is that I should cancel those plans to get the highlight of the day done. Well, sometimes here's what happens. It's an Indian holiday. Every 14 days, there's a new Indian holiday. If you're religious enough, there's a new Indian holiday every week. And my mom sometimes needs me to come over to break a coconut or something. To be fair, I do my best to keep my commitments to my friends and to clients and to my mom and her breaking of coconuts. I do my absolute best for that. But what I've come to realize is that it cannot come at the expense of my purpose.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like I like that idea. It's similar to the one thing idea, which is a book about that. It's like, what's your one thing? Your one thing that you're working on, your one thing that you're doing today, like that kind of stuff. And I like it. Like yeah, you should absolutely have a top priority for your day, and you should prioritize that thing, right? Like I find it easier to even just break up your week like that. Be like, what's this day for? If it's for nothing else, what is it for? Maybe it's for clearing certain emails, or maybe it's for creating a piece of content. I'm speaking obviously from the stuff that I do. And that's really powerful because it gives you focus. It lets you very easily prioritize, and our brain really sucks at context switching. I saw Elon Musk post a meme the other day about fear not being the mind killer, like that line from Dune. It's actually context switching is the mind killer. The more things that you switch between, the less psychological momentum you build. And so yeah, having one big thing that you're focused on is super, super useful. But it's I've been playing around with an idea to kind of go with that, where it's and it kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier in the call, where it's when I plan my days, I don't want to just be focusing on what I want to do. There also has to be some acknowledgement of what is the enemy of the day. It's all right, we got a goal, but are we really articulating what the enemy is? Maybe the enemy is procrastination. Maybe it's apathy. Maybe it's fear of negative feedback. All right. Maybe it's falling into negativity because of you're fighting with a spouse, or feeling like you're not getting enough attention from women, or whatever it is. And if you can identify and name, all right, here's my big thing I want to get done, and here's the big enemy that's going to try and get in the way. And if you just spend a few minutes labeling that and trying to come up with a strategy of, all right, here's my main mindset strategy for overcoming this biggest obstacle, or my practical strategy for it, I think something like that kind of takes the to-do list and planning and stuff like that to the next level, because it gives you a more holistic sort of adventure. It presses the story buttons in your brain, because in order to have a story, you need to have, a goal. There needs to be, something that they're progressing towards, something that, you and the characters in the story want, right? But then there's also always got to be some conflict. There's got to be something that's blocking them. And I think so often, when we sit down and we create to-do lists and shit like that, we don't really think about the conflict part. And it sounds like this is what he's literally run into, is that conflict will become anything. And he's able to kind of maybe nail it down to a few things. And I would say take that into consideration at the beginning of the day. Know that that's coming. Plan for it. Plan your internal and external battle strategy to overcome that thing that wants to come along and stop your ability to realize your main objective. So that's something I've been playing around with, and I think it's really, really powerful. I would love you guys to check that out as well. So give it a shot. When you're planning your day, don't just label your top, priority, your frog to swallow, or whatever, productivity methodology you like to use. Yes, point it out, but then point out what's the big enemy, right? What's the spiritual battle today? What's the mindset, or the emotion, or the distraction, or the whatever it is that's going to keep you from realizing it, and come up with a plan to counter it. And just a few minutes a day thinking like this, I think will truly supercharge the technique that Captain Sinbad here is talking about.
I really like that. Yeah. I want to try that too. I know focus is a big one, probably for a lot of people, but for me especially, it's there's that one thing, and he's running into this. Oh, there's so many other things. Let me ask you this before we wrap up here. How do you combat the temptation to say, yeah, the emails, I need to get the emails done, but man, I could do so much more than that. The emails is so easy. That takes a few minutes,
right?
Let's have 10 top priorities instead.
Right. Well, that's where I think batching and stuff is really useful, because it's let's say it's not just a couple of emails. Let's say, you save up and it's 10 or 15. And maybe you have, what I do is I save up for admin days, where I'll just do a whole bunch of administrative shit that is boring, that I don't like. But when and just broken individually into pieces, it doesn't seem like a formidable use of my time. But when I bundle it all up into some like big admin day, then it's like, oh, okay, this is actually something good and useful. This is something that, like, after I do it, I'm going to feel a big weight off my shoulders, because this the kind of stuff that sort of accumulates and nags and that sort of thing. So I think that really devoting your days to like different kinds of themes is very powerful. So that's the way I would approach it.
Nice. Yeah, I love it. All right, you guys, that's all we got for you on this episode of Man vs. World. Mark, is there anything what should the audience do next? Do we still have the same training up?
Yeah, I think we still have the same training up. We'll be continuing to update all of our offerings in 2023. If you guys got anything that you would like to see in particular from us, we'd love to get feedback from you. We're going to be continuing with further refining our offerings for helping guys quit porn. We're going to be also hopefully offering some other stuff too around productivity, around mindset, all that kind of stuff. But we're trying to do it right, trying to scale it properly, grow it in a way in which is really sustainable. We're trying to build something here that will last and allow guys to really grow with us. The Self Mastery Club is growing. We've got an iOS app now, which is awesome. We just improved our site performance by a ton. I'm going to be getting the Android app rolling here soon. I actually just connected with our developers, trying to get that rolling too. So a lot of cool stuff on the horizon, but if you want to get in on it now, you want to start mastering some of the techniques that I've developed for helping guys quit porn, become productive, get control of your mindset, all that sort of thing, then you want to check out the training in the link below. Check out the Manhood Mastery training. And we'll hopefully see you in the Self Mastery Club. But that's pretty much what we got for you guys today. So, ooyap. See you all on the next one.